The Buffalo Bills lose yet again in the NFL playoffs. Then 24 hours later, they fired their head coach Sean McDermott. Did the Buffalo Bills make the right decision firing Sean McDermott, Paige Dimakos?
Yes, they did. And I know that it came as a shock to a lot of people, but you and I talked about this on our last show that we thought that it was potentially time for them to move in a different direction. The problem is now the talent pool that's available to them coaching wise, right? And that's the unfortunate part of being in this. You make it this far in the postseason, and now there's already been quite a few of the top candidates that are already taking jobs or have taken jobs. That being said, I still think that Buffalo needed to move on. The part of this that I don't like is that it wasn't also including the general manager, who you and I both identified as the number one person to blame for what happened. And not only did they not fire him, they gave him a promotion. And that part of this is very perplexing, Keith. I can't quite understand why exactly, when you look at why the failures have happened right across the board for this team. To me, there's been when you're a defensive coach like Sean McDermott and you have the 13-second game, right, with Kansas City, and you've had some last second collapses defensively after heroic performances from Josh Allen, that's why I was ready to move on from the coaching staff. But I was also ready for them to make a move from Brandon Beane, and I did not think that there was any shot he was getting a promotion. So this is very interesting, Keith.
Yeah, it is. And I'll answer the question. I think it was the right time, right? It was the right time to move on from Sean McDermott. It feels as though they hit their ceiling, right? And I don't want this to be a situation where I think that, once you don't win in the playoffs a couple years, right, then it's time to move on from you, right? Because we've seen the Indianapolis coach stick it out with Tony Dungy, right? And then both me and you were against them, the Pittsburgh Steelers letting go Mike Tomlin or them deciding to part ways. And then the Baltimore Ravens firing John Harbaugh, we felt was the wrong decision. So it's not about a longevity thing. I think we talked about it on yesterday's show, right? Was that it's about the miscalculations of when to be aggressive and when to be passive, right? And knowing your football team and understanding, and also kind of knowing yourself, right? Because it seems as though there were times Sean McDermott kind of read the press clippings and he went into the game saying, hey, I'm going to be aggressive, instead of understanding the ebbs and flows of the football game. But I want to get to the Brandon Beane part of this, because that's the more interesting part, right? The fact that he got a promotion. But you know what I thought about? I thought about a totally different sport in the NBA. When Brad Stevens got let go from his head coaching duties and they moved him to the front office, I wonder if there's going to be something like that type of transition, because his new title is president of football operations. So I wonder if they plan on post-draft relinquishing his duties and then transitioning him to president of football operations. Now, does he deserve that part? That still remains to be understood, right? But I started thinking about a transition part, and if that's the direction they're deciding to go, because when you look at what Brandon Beane has drafted, he's missed. It's not been good the past 3-4 years, and it's the clear reason why this roster has slowly been getting worse and worse.
It's tough for me to look at the Brandon Beane part of this and go, when you take it back to this offseason where he goes on the radio show, right? And he's talking back and forth with those, guys in the local market that cover Buffalo. And he's saying, we don't need a receiver, right? He kind of had it in a bravado way. He was, well, you guys got a lot to say about how we didn't draft a receiver, but we had the number one offense in the NFL. And he came in very hot about that in argumentative. And now to think you started things off that way and then continued to double down, it's almost like you made a mistake and then you tried to justify the mistake over and over and over again. And unfortunately, the leadership with Buffalo and ownership didn't hold him accountable. And instead, Sean McDermott took the fall for what, to me, was at minimum equal parts blame on both sides. And to me, more of a failure on Brandon's side of things. When you look at the draft picks they've had over the last 3 years, since Josh has been elevated to the elite category, right? The last 4 years, they have gotten worse every single year. And I'm talking worse on the roster. And those are decisions that are being made by the general manager. And then the coach is then having to deal with less and less tools in his toolbox that he is able to then go coach. Now, I'm not saying Sean McDermott was without he deserved blame. And I want fans to understand, this was a culmination of things. He didn't get fired because of that Broncos game. He
No.
got fired because of the failures over the last 4 years. When I think back to the 13 seconds game in Kansas City, I thought he might get fired after that game happened, right? When you have your superstar quarterback put you up on the road in Arrowhead with 13 seconds remaining and you need one stop, and you are a defensive head coach and you don't get that done, that in and of itself was a moment that I thought they might make a change. So this is a culmination of things on the coaching staff. But one of the things you and I talk about a lot is the timing of things. I don't like that. To me, it was very clearly the general manager, number one, to blame, number two, head coach to blame. I don't like that they didn't exit both of these guys at the same time, because now you're going to bring in another coach. We're unsure what's going on with Brandon Beane, because I kind of think what you said might be true, that he may be relinquishing some duties, but then how is that going to be with a new general manager, or is that even true?
Well,
I don't like that timing wise, right? Like I wish they would have fired both guys and started fresh instead of doing it the way that they're doing it.
yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think in most situations, that's the way you would want it, right? But I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if they're trying to free up that space so then that way they can negotiate with a head coach and tell him you have opportunities and duties as a general manager, right? Like bring
Yeah.
bring your guy in and then he can be the acting general manager, but you have the duty and the job to be able to act as the general manager how you see fit. And it could be a bargaining chip for if they're trying to go big fish hunting.
I think if they were going to be able to have conversations with John Harbaugh, right? But that conversation's not happening. So if you look around, right, you're going, the only coach to me that has the cachet to even have that conversation is Mike Tomlin. But that's going to require first round picks. There's going to require picks being traded to Pitt. Like, he can't come. Pittsburgh owns his rights. So to be able to do that, there's going to be a lot of negotiation. And I'm pretty certain Mike's going to take a year, just like Sean Payton did, to take a media year and then come back. But now there's
Well,
more jobs open. So it's going to be this job we didn't see coming open. Now
yeah.
this could be
And
very interesting
And if
now.
I'm Mike Tomlin, I don't know if I'm waiting a year. If I
I,
get if I know I want to coach next year, I'm
I'd
saying, you
take the
know
Buffalo
what? Go
job.
ahead and dust it off. Let's get rocking and rolling right now.
I,
If the Buffalo
I
Bills
agree.
come in and offer me, right? Because
Yeah.
not too many times you get opportunity to insert yourself into coaching a all pro quarterback, right? And plenty of times you have to draft the guy and develop him and hope that he turns out, right? But you know what
Correct.
this guy is. This is a league MVP that you're getting the
Yep.
opportunity to be able to run, and they're asking you just to take them to the promised land. So if I was him,
And
I'm like, listen, you know what? No days off. Go ahead, lock me in. Let's rock and roll.
And I think obviously this was, not a job that would have been available had that end of the game controversial call even happened, right? So this was a potential job that a lot of people did not see. There was a lot of surprise. I personally wasn't surprised. I thought that this job was I thought Sean McDermott was on the hot seat, considering how things played out, right? And also just the turnover with a lot of these old school regimes that had more success and had longer, like you think of Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh. If those guys are moving on, what's stopping the Buffalo Bills from moving on? And so this becomes a very interesting conversation, whether or not Pittsburgh and Buffalo could get this deal done, right? Because there's going to have to be negotiation. But if I'm Buffalo, I'm taking a swing. And if you're Pittsburgh, what a way to turn your franchise around really quickly by acquiring some picks to turn things around and try and go get yourself your future quarterback, because that's been your problem for quite some time.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm gonna ask this: do you think that's the number one option? That should be the number one option for the Buffalo Bills, Mike Tomlin?
It should be Mike Tomlin, with a clause that I know who the offensive coordinator is,
Okay.
because it cannot be Arthur Smith. It cannot be the traditional guys and Mike's going to have to change and adapt and evolve some of the things and the ways that he's been used to playing. But that being said, when Mike has won and been at his best, he's had Ben Roethlisberger, right? You had the top
Was
tier.
it? Yeah, he had
Yeah,
Charles Haley as his OC,
yep.
right? Was it Charles
And
Haley?
Bruce
I,
Arians. Bruce
yeah,
Arians was the OC when they won a Super Bowl
yeah.
with Ben. So, I mean, you got to be able to bring in in a perfect world, you keep Joe Brady. You keep Joe Brady. You keep the consistency offensively, and you're able to bring Mike Tomlin in, or you're able to convince Brian Daboll that he can come in, be an OC under Mike Tomlin, let him kind of get his reputation back. And then in 2 years, you go win a Super Bowl and you go coach somewhere else and become a head coach again, right? I think those are your two, in my opinion, your best options for consistency offensively. And when you look at Tomlin, what he brings to the table would be instantly keeping the stability, right? And the floor of what you've seen with Buffalo, because Buffalo was a 17-year gap of not making the postseason before Sean McDermott got there. And it's been a nice stretch for them, right? They've made the postseason 8 years in a row. It's been that to not have that consistency would be very hard for Buffalo. So if you have the floor of Mike Tomlin with the upside of an OC, whether it's keeping Joe Brady or getting a Brian Daboll, I mean, man, that's a pretty exciting proposition if I'm a Buffalo Bills fan.
Yeah, I agree. And the name I was trying to mention was Todd Haley. I said Charles Haley. That's the edge
Todd
rusher.
Haley.
It was Todd Haley, right? Bruce
Yeah.
Arians and Todd Haley. And he had both of those guys. So I agree. If he's able to keep a dynamic play caller at the offensive coordinator position, you definitely go all in on Mike Tomlin for all the reasons that you stated.